who'd campaigned tirelessly for his people and ultimately for a peaceful resolution with Israel, right? Anyway, later, I think it was 2012, so 8 years had passed, and Al Jazeera and his wife and other people who cared organised a forensic investigation into how Arafat had died. And I have to say that Al Jazeera did an amazing service with this documentary, which I don't remember at the time. I never saw it then. They discovered that Suha, the wife, had a bag of his clothes from the hospital which had bodily fluids on from his time in the hospital before his death. You know, when you go and pick up the items of a bereaved person. I remember getting them from my father when he died in hospital. And they did analysis on this, and they discovered something very shocking. They discovered that in these bodily fluids was evidence of polonium, which is one of the most lethal substances used for assassinations nowadays. It's a radioactive substance, and it was used to kill Litvinenko, a Russian, in London. It reduced him from a healthy man to a sort of shell of a person and killed him within a few days. And it looked like, from this study that was done by a French forensic team, that that's what happened to Arafat. They said, well, we can't be absolutely sure because there's two kinds of polonium. There's military grade, which can only be made by a nuclear armed state or a nuclear energy state, like France or Russia or Britain or Israel. And then there's kind of naturally occurring polonium that he could have just caught by accident, so to speak. They said, we won't know unless we exhume the body and analyse it in depth. And it took them, I think, 2 years of negotiation, and finally the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas agreed to exhume the body. It was a courageous thing. Some people said, no, don't, but they did, and I think they're right. And enough extract from the bodily remains still remained. They were taken away by 3 teams, Russian, Swiss and French forensic medical experts, analysed these remains and discovered that it was military-grade polonium that killed Arafat. In other words, it was an assassination. It wasn't he got a food bug and died or got flu. This was a polonium assassination, and the only people that could have done it are nuclear states, and that includes Israel, Britain, America, France, Pakistan, the list. And I just find this very shocking for my Palestinian friends, the people that knew Arafat. And what I find so cynical is that he was a man who'd now taken the path of peace and was trying to get dialogue and rational peace between Israel and Palestinians. And if it was Israel, let's just put an if and say suspend judgment, but if Israel was involved and implicated, which is possible because Ariel Sharon was the Israeli leader at the time, and he'd been initially bound by an oath he took for the Americans not to harm Arafat, and he rescinded himself from this oath a few months before the assassination, and he said to camera, it's in the film, you can watch it, that he regarded himself as no longer bound by the oath. Well, to me, this is like an admission of guilt, actually. He, in his mind, and I don't know why these people think the way they do, he felt justified in killing Arafat. It's one of those mysteries. But then, of course, covering it up, lying about it, and not allowing it to come out until just recently. These documentaries have only just come out. You can see them through my links I put on my Facebook page and on YouTube and so on. So that's another lie, another aggregation of lies that adds to the pile, the killing of Arafat in an assassination. I would like to know the truth. I chair the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. We're not going to get truth and reconciliation unless we know the truth, seriously, of these things. If it was someone in Israel connected with the Ariel Sharon, rulership, then those people should be brought to trial, in my view. And if it had help from other agencies, like in America or even Britain, I don't know, they should be put on trial, because that was a murder of a peace visionary who now wanted peace with Israel. And in the name of his honour, it should be that the people that killed him should stand trial. The Palestinians want it to go before the International Court of Justice. Israel and America are blocking Palestine joining the International Court of Justice, so it's a kind of catch-22. I'm willing to chair a Truth and Justice Commission inquiry into that murder and allow people with evidence to come forward, because somebody has to find out the truth here for the healing of the region. You see, there's two kinds of peace. There's peace that comes through violent suppression, conflict, death, killing. That's not peace. That's I don't know. That's just like a genocide against truth. That's not peace. That's Hitler's vision. And then there's true peace, which comes from allowing the truth to emerge, from discussion, dialectic, dialogue. That's the Socratic path of truth, when we discuss and we find the truth together. This is what Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, said. This is the dialectics of I and thou. We discuss the truth and find it together. It's a common truth. That's what needs to happen over the Arafat thing, also over the Iraq War, and also over 9/11. I'm merely pointing this out as a philosopher. And so the suppression of the Palestinians' version or narrative of events needs to be ended. But also they were implicated in anti-Semitic attacks and attempts to kill the Jews and so on and so on. So I'm not sort of saying the Palestinians are all right, Israelis are all wrong. I'm not. I'm saying absolutely they're brothers and cousins fighting a horrendous war. I'm on both sides simultaneously because I'm coming from a place of love and the eagle-eye vision of compassion, if you want. The truth has to come out. Another thing that I think the truth is needed over is Brexit, because you've heard me say before. Now, some people say, oh, well, Brexit's got nothing to do with the Middle East, but I'm afraid I completely and utterly disagree, because I think it has everything to do with these wars that have been going on. Brexit, to me, and I've got into this, is a kind of attempt to capture the UK by the US neo-imperialist world hegemony project, which has been active since 9/11. I think the evidence shows that people involved in US intelligence and the Bush administration had foreknowledge of 9/11 and were implicit in colluding in it happening. And then in manipulating the media so nobody hears about it. I mean, I had a very interesting phone call with a dear friend of mine whose father was a general in World War II and was in D-Day, which we've just celebrated the anniversary of, and was a close friend of Eisenhower, the American president. And his daughter, who I spoke to at length, who lives a fairly sort of sheltered life in Britain, in the West Country, had never heard of the possibility that 9/11 might have not been, Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. That's a very intelligent woman. So the media have done a very skillful job at keeping out the truth, actually, from the narrative. And if you listen to the brilliant talk by Vivienne Westwood discussing Julian Assange's case, she rightly points out that there's the distinction between the narrative, which is what is created by the media. Julian Assange is the devil, he must be transported back to America and face, lifelong tortures and imprisonment. That's the narrative. Versus the truth. Listen to Vivienne Westwood's talk about it. It's spot on. So we have the narrative over Brexit, which is European Union evil. It's a bad thing. We hate it. British people want independence. Let's go for it. We voted. We won. We're leaving. We're leaving. We're leaving. That's the narrative, right? Which is pumped out by the BBC, pumped out by the mainstream media, pumped out by a few brain-dead acolytes of this neo-imperialist American military establishment, which are trying to hijack the UK. It's shocking. Now, this is being imposed on the UK notwithstanding the wishes of the Scots, who are treated as if they don't exist, have no right to a view. And I think it was utterly shocking, this quote from Boris Johnson, a poem he published, like the most offensive racist attack on the Scots, saying they should be genocided, saying they should be rounded up and put in camps and gassed effectively. The Tory party should disown this man. He should never be allowed to. They should take the whip off him. He's an immoral peddler of lies and racism and I'll come back to him in a minute. But so, and the people of Northern Ireland, because they are the only people in Britain who've actually suffered a war in recent history on their streets in Belfast. I've spoken to them, I've met people who were in that war on both sides. They don't want to go back to it. I also run the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, and I'm part Irish, and I've spent a lot of time looking at the Irish problem, and I've been there. We don't want to go back to that horrendous time of troubles, as it's glossed, but it was actually a war. And the British establishment fought a very nasty war. And no thank you, we don't want to go back to it. So Brexit, however, from the perspective of the Brexit plotters, none of that matters. It's made a decision at some high level, think tank in mid-Atlantic, and Saudis were there, and Israelis, and the kind of establishment that has been peddling lies since 9/11 said, no, we've got to get the UK out of Europe, because then it can be a much more useful aircraft carrier off Europe, and it will let us bomb wherever. Well, I'm sorry, folks. Brexit, again, the truth should come out over that. That's another part of the aggregation of lies, and that's why, as a philosopher, I've taken such a strong stand against Brexit, because all my instincts, all my intuition tell me this thing was a lie, a false construction right from the very beginning. And when I see people like Steve Bannon and his poodle Farage involved, I know it's got it written all over it. So it was a false creation, and it was done very skillfully, giving people the illusion of well, it's your choice, this is democracy. Very skillful, brainwashing through the media, and it's done with the Goebbels manipulation of language, using Goebbels type technique of simplification of thought. So that's another lie that's unravelling. You see, ultimately the power of truth is stronger than the power of lies. In the Christian theological tradition that I partly come from, we believe that the Holy Spirit is truth, aletheia in Greek. That's what unravels evil. Gradually evil falls apart, it decays, it crumbles, because the power of truth, which is in the Bible, it's talked about, the Ruach HaKodesh is a Hebrew concept. Solomon works with the Ruach HaKodesh, and God works with the Ruach HaKodesh, or Hokmah, because that spirit of truth, that spirit of wisdom is what is creative. When that is present, things get created, people fall in love. Worlds are born, civilizations come into being, books get written. When lies come, things fall apart, cities collapse, towers fall down, people die, people commit suicide. That's the two forces: what Freud called the thanatos instinct, which is the destructive one, and the libido, which is the life-affirming, creative one. I know which side I'm on. And that's the libido side. And that's the side of the Holy Spirit and of truth. Another thing in the aggregation of lies that needs, unravelling is this tragic murder of Jamal Kashoggi, who was a Saudi intellectual. And I feel, he should have been sitting on my World Intellectual Forum. He was a clever man, a good man, a journalist and a writer, a thinker, and He'd actually interviewed Osama bin Laden. I'd love to have interviewed Khashoggi and asked him on behalf of the TRC for the Middle East, about his views about 9/11, for instance, and whether there was Saudi complicity and, what really happened. He's the kind of guy you could have sat down with and got him to tell you what he knew. But now he's gone, chopped up into pieces by order of the Saudis. 99.9% definitely approved by this man, Mohammed bin Salman, who's now rattling the saber saying we want to bomb Iran. I mean, this man is like the Antichrist. And the truth has to come out about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Proper truth, not just fake truth, but real truth. The Turks should do a proper investigative legal process. They should summon Mohammed bin Salman to court in Istanbul to answer charges of complicity in murder. I don't care if this man is the head of, a few oil companies. The Ottoman Turks and the Turkish intellectuals eventually, with Ataturk, realised that to make your way in the modern world, you have to actually be quite wise. The Turks had pioneered a form of Islam that allowed Christians, Jews, Baha'is, everybody to coexist in peace after the chaos and horrors of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, in which they went mad and did genocide against the Armenians and so on. The Turks are on their own learning curve towards wisdom. So what I'm saying is the truth needs to come out. I've been to Istanbul several times, be very happy to chair some kind of meeting in Istanbul, bringing together people to discuss. But it would have to be done legally we could do it informally, like a sort of commission of inquiry, or we could do it with the approval and support of the Turkish legal authorities. The Americans seem to want to hush all this up, and Trump is just a stool for the disinformation and lie brigade of the military-industrial intelligence complex. So the truth about that needs to come out. And then there's Boris Johnson. I said I'd save him for later. Well, he is the king of lies. You can tell it. I mean, he seems to have got this idea that politics is about lying. Somebody mistaught him politics at Eton. I don't know who was his lecturer in political studies or if he did it. I know my daughter went to a study week at Eton and met his English teacher. She was taught English by him. But I don't know who taught him political studies. I don't know what they teach at Eton. I mean, if they want to give me a job teaching political science at Eton, I'd be very happy. I was trained to teach citizenship at a very high level in schools, and I have done. And I mean, what the basic argument that Machiavelli said is like, to succeed as a statesman, you have to be able to lie. Well, but you must never be caught doing it. If you are caught, you lose your credibility. You have to be appearing to be telling the truth. At least Machiavelli was a wise man. Whereas these people are so blatantly stupid that they think that it's just fine to lie, and even if you're caught, it doesn't matter. Well, I'm afraid it does. We can't have governments that have become that deceptive to the people. And this is why, so what can we do about it? Well, Boris Johnson should not be elected as leader of the Tory party, and then this idea of shoehorning him into becoming Prime Minister, it makes a constitutional mockery of our democratic procedures. And I think there's something to be said for some kind of French electoral presidential system for the Prime Minister, that it's not enough that they should command a majority in Parliament of MPs. I think maybe that then it should go to the electorate as a whole, like the French president. I don't know, I suspend judgment. The Queen is a sort of, fine, I love her, constitutional monarch, but the real power in Britain is the Prime Minister. Well, I think the people should vote on that. And we would then get better candidates. So really what it would be, the parties decide who would be their candidate for the election by the voters. So Labour would promote, Jeremy Corbyn, Tories would promote X, Lib Dems X, and then you have a general election in which everybody... So it'd be like a double general election. You'd vote for your MP, but you'd also vote for the Prime Minister independently. Because I think that would be a constitutional safeguard, because at the moment we've got this crazy system whereby, a party that once was in favour and won an election, like some years ago, can be hijacked and taken over by corrupt forces, possibly even treasonous forces, I still think that it's very probable that the Americans have corrupted the senior Tory party to such an extent under Theresa May that they've literally been conniving in treason over Brexit, because Theresa May and her advisors in a cabal in the Tory party know it's against the interests of the UK, but it's 100% in the interests of the US. So they've colluded in treason, in my opinion. Now, that's all perfectly legal according to our constitution, and there's nothing we can do about it. And if Boris Johnson comes in power lying and deceitful and pushes that through, nothing we can do, you know. Well, I think there should be, and I don't think a new Prime Minister should be affirmed without a secondary vote, a general election. And anyway, discuss, you know, I'm just saying this as a citizenship teacher who's given a lot of thought to politics. So what can we do to counter all this? I've given a list of 7 issues to do with untruth, and 8, including the worst, which is war in Iran. You know, what I'm saying is, if there's a war in the Middle East with Iran, it comes as a result of the good people of my country, Britain and Europe, not doing enough to counter the lies. I've been doing what I can as a philosopher, as a teacher, as a writer. You know, I've published, like my book on 9/11, like 40 other books I've published, like my doctoral thesis. But I'm just one voice, you know. We need millions of people. And it's not just enough to oppose Brexit, and that's great. We have 17 million people, you know, opposing Brexit and marching and signing petitions. We have to oppose the whole system of lies that underpins Brexit. And we have to study to analyse where, you know, they're all interlinked. There's a jigsaw puzzle here. If you thought Brexit was bad, you know, just look a little deeper in this pile of lies and you see they're interconnected. So truth likewise is seamless. The counterbalance to all this is truth energy. Gandhi said the peace worker is a truth worker. And I want to talk now, I want to turn to the positive work we can do. How can we counter these lies? What is the aggregation of truth force that we can accumulate? And this is not only because I run the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland and for the Middle East, and also for Stonehenge, that's the third one, but that's the first one actually, which is about pagan rights. But I'm going to talk about a series of projects and ways that we can advance truth in this world. So one is this proposal I came up with a few years ago, which I wrote to the then Prime Ministers about, Cameron and Clegg, and I said, what you should do is bring in a law that parliamentarians have to tell the truth. Absolutely as simple as that. You see, as a trained teacher, qualified teacher, we're monitored and vetted for our probity, our morality, our competency and so on. And every profession is. Lawyers have to pass loads of exams and prove that they're worthy to be lawyers. Vicars have to pass loads of exams, you know. Medical doctors are constantly being examined, and if you lie or if you are deceptive in giving patients treatment, you would be struck off the medical register. I think the politicians should have a similar thing, like a politician's register, and if they're found to lie, they should be struck off and denied a license to be a politician. Just as to be a barrister or a lawyer you need a license, or to be a teacher. These are important jobs which have the future of the kids of our country at stake, and the future of our, you know, citizens. So, and the politician is at the apex of them, because they are the guys that make the laws that then regulate all the others, and yet they're not themselves regulated. They can get away with literally murder. So I'm saying no, democracy demands that we, the people, insist these politicians who we keep electing have to sign up for an oath of veracity, and if they break it, they lose their parliamentary licence. And it would apply to Lords as well as MPs. And it should be in the UK Parliament, in the Scottish, the Welsh, the Northern Ireland Assembly, which needs to re-meet, in Dublin, in Strasbourg, in the European Parliament, and in America, in the House of Congress, and in India and all the other parliaments. Every single member of the International Parliamentary Association should endorse this proposal. That's a serious proposal I've put on the table, and I'd love to work with any experts in drafting legislation, getting it through, please contact me. This is a campaign I'm running. And it would, I think, in one blow, I think that would be the most economical way of turning this planet around. Because if people like John Bolton and Trump and all the other American politicians had to tell the truth, and it would apply to also, obviously, prime ministers, presidents, monarchs even, then they would lose office if they're lying. Okay, another thing that I think I've been investigating is the question of what I call comparative diabology, because I have some friends that come around here, some Jehovah's Witnesses that I've got friendly with in France, and they come around and say, the problem is, Thomas, you're up against the devil. You can't win. Satan runs this world. He's inspiring these wars. Satan has got the mind of Trump, and Theresa May's captured them. They're just puppets in Satan's hand. And these powerful people do what they want because they're backed up by Satan. They can get away with it. Right, so, and that's kind of what the Cathars were saying back in the 13th century, which is why they ended up falling out with the Catholic Church. I said to these people, well, I'm a kind of Anglican Druid. I'm not sure that I buy the Satan's taken over the world theory. What I have done as a scholar is tried to understand the diabolic in history. What is it? Is it a psychological force? Is it a sort of literal possession that comes over people? What is it that tends to make people go the dark path of lying? And how can it be redeemed? How can we exorcise literally these people? So that's an ongoing work I'm doing. I've got another conference coming up on July the 22nd, because the other thing I've done is created the Mary Magdalene Studies Association with colleagues, because Mary Magdalene was exorcised. She was supposed to have had diabolic possession, and then she was purified and freed. And she became the expert in the Sangha of early Christians at exorcism. And the people around her and Jesus then carried the flame of how to turn people from darkness to light. That's what interests me about the Mary Magdalene story. And so we're looking at it from all angles. It's what interests me about the study of comparative diabology, which I've also just recently published a book about. If we can find what this shadow is, as Jung called it, that creates this negative force in human beings and creates aggression and violence and the tendency to lie, then perhaps we can educate humanity out of those tendencies. Discuss. Okay, I'm also doing a commentary on the works of St. Paul, because to me Paul is a fearless devotee of truth. He was someone that had a spiritual contact with the risen Christ and believed that he was now sent on a mission to educate the Gentiles, the people of Europe. And our greatest church in England is called St. Paul's, or one of, in London, which I know very well. And so I received my doctoral robes at the Barbican, just around the corner from St. Paul, for the University of London. So I kind of want to really grapple and understand the mind of Paul about how you stand up against the forces of darkness. He talks about truth. For him, Christ is the embodiment of truth. He used to be on the side of the dark, if you want. He was a persecutor, a zealot, a bigot, using extreme violence. And then he flipped. How did that flip happen, and what was the psychological thing? Because that's very interesting. If we can discover that and get all the people that are currently, plotting the next level of lies, or bone saw murders, or bombings of neutral, peaceful countries, or polonium killings, those are the people that we need to flip now. They need a bit of the St. Paul insight injected, if you want, the redemptive juices of Pauline Holy Spirit power. So that's why I'm doing a commentary on Galatians actually at the moment, which and it's very interesting. At one point he says in that book, he says, "Oh, silly Galatians." He's lambasting them for going down the legalist route after they'd understood spirituality and faith and the path to righteousness, they then started buying trinkets and going back down the legal route. And he just says, "You silly Galatians," and the word in Greek is unnoetical Galatians. It's people lacking in nous, which is intellect in Greek, or understanding. So people without understanding. And I think that sums up the causes of the ignorance and darkness in the world. It's just lack of understanding. These are silly people. Silly John Bolton, silly Mr. Trump, silly Theresa May. Lacking in understanding, lacking in nous. They haven't read their Galatians recently. So there's another strategy I'm pursuing to try and increase the intellectual quotient of the people that seem to be about to destroy my planet. I really don't like that. I love this world. It's not my planet, but it's our planet. Okay, then another strategy is to do a commentary on the Quran, because as a philosopher of comparative religion and spirituality, I've taken initiation in many paths, and one of them is in Sufism and in Islam. And if you look at previous lifetimes and you look at the whole, each one of us is just, the current life of a soul. Well, I'm sure I've been a Sufi in some former life. And so for me, doing a commentary on the Quran is just like old hat. I know this text intimately. And I'm doing it for this modern age, though, in English. And it's the most comprehensive, most detailed commentary on the Quran that's ever been attempted in the English language. And I'm not boasting. I'm not, it's a bit of a, it's a long work. And it's the most philosophical commentary. There are other commentaries you can go to for much more detailed analysis of the philology of the Arabic terminology and the detailed references to the hadith and so on. I'm not doing all that. I'm going into the philosophical meaning of the verses as I can understand them. And at the moment I'm commenting on Surah 8, which is a Medinan surah, which is Anfal, spoils, which interestingly enough is about warfare in the Islamic world. When is it legitimate to fight? Is it? Under what circumstances? This was received soon after the Battle of Badr, which was the first ever battle that the Muslim army, small little Muslim army, was ever involved with. Muhammad didn't want it to go that route. He only had 300 men in his army, little army, most of whom were not tried warriors or anything. And suddenly they're up against an army from Mecca of 1,000 strong. And what he basically says in this surah is, don't worry about the numbers, because it's the morale that counts. And if God is with you, if the Spirit is with you, then you will have the victory. And what I'm saying is that we don't need to have the wars to prove that anymore. We know that. What we need is to take the struggle to a common level of a struggle for truth. So instead of there being wars in the Middle East against another Islamic country, Iran, the West would be much more advised to turn to scholarship. If every American citizen could have religious studies in their schools, they never learn about religions in the schools, so they only get what their own family teaches. I'd love to advise the American government on introducing RE into schools in America, because knowledge of Islam, it reveals there's nothing actually to be afraid of. It's an incredibly sophisticated religion at its best. Just as Christianity has some very, very backward little sects that, do weird stuff, and then mainstream, authentic, highly intellectual, amazing stuff going on as well. And we would be... you only learn this out if you do proper religious studies, and if you study, for instance, my chart of the comparative religions of the world. This is the periodic table of the world's religions, which is my present to every student on this planet that wants to learn the whole lot. What I argue is you are going to be illiterate religiously unless you study all 168 boxes.